Hello, and welcome to Season 1, Episode 8 of the Virtual Coffee Podcast. I'm Bekah, and this is a podcast that features members of the Virtual Coffee community. Virtual Coffee is an intimate group of developers at all stages of their coding journey, and they're here on this podcast sharing their stories and what they've learned. And we're here to share it with you. Here with me today is my co-host, Dan.
Thanks, Bekah. Today we are joined by none other than Kirk Shillingford, a software developer from Dominica who, in his words, has been haphazardly writing code for about 7 years. Kirk is also one of Virtual Coffee's community maintainers and a good friend to us both. We talk about making mistakes, empathy in developer teams, and the importance of having a supportive community.
We start every episode of the podcast like we start every Virtual Coffee. We introduce ourselves with our name, where we're from, what we do, and a random check-in question. Today's question is, what is your favorite geometric shape and why? We hope you enjoy this episode. I'm Bekah. I am a front-end developer from a small town in Ohio, and my favorite geometric shape is it's either a triangle or a pentagon, and probably because they are single-digit odd numbers, and that makes me feel happy inside.
Hi, I'm Dan. I'm a front-end developer from Cleveland. And my favorite geometric shape, I don't know. I don't think I have one. I like a hexagon because it sounds cool, and octagon because my favorite Transformer was Optimus Prime when I was a kid, and I mean still obviously, but I named my hamster after him, but didn't actually know what his name was, so I called him Optimus, and then we just called the hamster Octo all the time, so it reminds me of that because I am awesome.
Hi, my name is Kirk. I'm a full stack developer from the small island of Dominica, and my favorite geometric shape is the dodecahedron, and obviously that needs no explanation, so let's go.
That's the 20-sided, right?
It's the 12-sided.
12-sided? Well, what's the 20-sided one?
How? Icosahedron. How could you confuse those two?
I think you two are making these things up.
If we want to make this entire podcast about geometry, I can totally do that.
I like math, but geometry is my least favorite. So we're going to pass.
You're probably like one of those calculus people.
I don't know, spatial things they don't work in my brain. Okay. Kirk, we are super happy to have you actually back on the podcast because you co-hosted one of our episodes, the one with Marie earlier in the season. So it is good to have you here with us today. And first, we'll start off with your origin story for those who don't know. So tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are as a developer and how you came to Virtual Coffee.
Wait, I thought this was a whiteboard interview. Oh, that changes everything.
About geometric shapes? That's why you knew that. You were prepared.
People take the strangest Google questions, Yeah, okay. Let's talk about how this all started. Picture it. Dominica, 2014-15. I was in fourth form. You guys, fourth form?
No.
Mm-mm.
Okay. Sophomore-ish, junior-ish high school.
Got it.
And back then, my school there was information technology, and there were two tracks: information technology technical and information technology general. These names are relevant because they are not. They have absolutely nothing to do with anything. The technical was like all Microsoft. It was like Word, Excel, Access, that whole thing, Publisher, all that stuff. And general was the one that had like actual programming, and I had no idea what that was even about. So I'm like, okay, I should do this one. That train of thought would like be the next 10 years of my life. So yeah, we got into it, and it was Turbo Pascal, which for some reason the Caribbean Examinations Council was like, this is a relevant language that people should learn in 2004. I heard that they still use Turbo Pascal. Like, you can still submit projects in Turbo Pascal, which is terrifying. But yeah, so we were in this class, and it was like 10 of us, and the teacher was like, I've never done this before, so, go for it. And that was like it was like one of my most fun classes. Just because like we were just learning, and like I think the internet, like we could like search stuff, but obviously it wasn't like now, so you're just like finding like weird stuff in forums, and we were just like messing with the code, and like nothing was like clever back then, so you could not end your for loops and just like eat up all the RAM on the machine and just crash computer, which we thought was hilarious. And then somebody figured out how to get the code to like produce sounds, so you could like do the Star Wars Darth Vader theme just using like computer beeps, and that was like really fun. And I remember my final project was a BMI calculator thing. Like the projects didn't have to be complicated, and I don't stand by that code, nor do I stand by BMI, but it was like my first time actually doing that, and that was pretty cool. And but then I didn't touch code for like 3 or 4 years, because in my head, like that was not my thing. My thing was maths. So I did more math, and then that became engineering. And still, like, there's very much like, there's no concept. Like, I liked it, but it wasn't like, okay, this is not, there was no point where like, okay, this is a career, until 2 years into my environmental engineering degree. I just was at a conference, and I saw like a bunch of people in t-shirts, whereas every other person in this conference is wearing a suit, and there's just some company wearing like blue t-shirts. And I'm like, okay, let's find out what these folks are about. And of course they were software consultancy, and they're like, hey, you want to take our test? And they gave me like this logic test. I'm like, oh, this is pretty neat. And then they put me through way too many interviews, and then I got an internship with them. But that was kind of like my segue back into programming. Like, oh, this is pretty fun. And it was like helping me with like traditional engineering stuff. And then that just became like, okay, I just want to do more of this and less of the other stuff. And then that just became, oh, I guess I do this now. So now I am here on this podcast.
That's pretty crazy. That's awesome that it was like sort of a random happening that you ran into those people at that conference. Do you think you would have not found your way to or back to developing if that hadn't happened?
I'm pretty sure. I mean, and it's a weird thing now. Like, I still don't feel. It's like there's a difference between the stuff that I like and the things that I think that I'm actually good at. Like math and I guess programming are things that I like to do. I don't necessarily feel a particular aptitude for them. This is what my brain is like supposed to be doing. That in a weird way has been more things like writing and I don't know, just like a different style of communication. But when I found them, it was just like an interesting alternative, because I'd spent 2 years in this world of these like very, very serious engineer people, like they wear ties to work and they build like structures and like everything is super critical. Like, if you don't do this, you will poison the town's water supply, and then I meet these like sort of strange people who are like, oh yeah, we don't, we do work, but like all the sort of like trappings and structure that I'd associated with like professional environments, which is different. And I found that really appealing, because I'm like, okay, these people they just want me to do the work. They don't have to like put myself in this cookie cutter sort of template to do it. And yeah, so I don't know if I hadn't met them, I might still be just a traditional engineer, I guess. And to be fair, like I didn't change my major like once I met them. It was just like, okay, I realized like, oh, software is more than just this fun thing that I did in high school. it's actually this pretty useful and important tool, and I'm not terrible at doing it. So that was fun.
That's really cool.
I think it was cool. Also, they paid me way too much money. Like as an intern, they never had interns before. So they just like gave us like regular dev salaries. And I'm like, okay, this can work too. That was also quite nice.
Nice. Yeah. Okay. So I also want to talk a little bit about how you came to Virtual Coffee, and you've been hugely involved in what we're doing and helping support the community for a while. And we'll get to that a little bit later on, but just how did you discover Virtual Coffee, and do you remember the first time you came?
This is my favorite story because I want to make this clear. I knew Bekah first. I knew Bekah before she blew up. All right. Way back when Bekah was still underground. Because, okay, at some point, I want to say, like very, very early on, when you were still in Flatiron, you started tweeting about coding, and I started following you. Because I remember I was on this, like, very determined thing to not follow people who had like tens of thousands of, like these sort of like big techniques. Like, these people are not relevant to my life. And you just posted a tweet saying like, hey, I'm trying this thing and I don't know if it's going to work out. I'm like, that's how I feel. And, then you do that thing where like you're Twitter friends of someone where like you see them post and you just like, hey, support, encouragement. And kind of did that for a while. And then I remember you started posting about VC, and I was like, that's during work time. I can't do that. So I think I missed maybe like the first month or two. But eventually, I'm just like, this sounds like a lot of fun. Like work's not being fun right now. So I think, when was the first time I came? I want to say it's like May or June.
Okay. Yeah.
And I came once and I didn't come again for like a couple of months, but I joined the Slack. And like the Slack was a big thing because even like when I was working, like I could still like hang out in the Slack and kind of see what was going on. But I would also see people like, the meeting was so great today. I'm like, I'm not going to meetings. And that's kind of just how that happened. Yes, I want to make it absolutely fundamentally clear. I knew Bekah first.
I have to say, it took me a long time to realize who you were because your Twitter picture was not a picture of you. It was was it a cartoon of a green? Okay.
Yeah, it's a Pokemon.
It was something. Sure. So that it's always funny to see people who their Twitter picture either doesn't look like them or something totally different. And then it takes me like a really long time for that to click and like, oh, that's that person I've been talking to for all of that time. So that was also you. I did not recognize you because you are not a Pokemon, in fact.
What?
Debatable.
That should have been our question. If you could be a Pokemon, which one would you be and why?
Well, my answer is I just got to check my Twitter. But yeah, I mean, I remember like we had the whole like TK Kirk kerfuffle, like when this had all just started, right? Because like online, I've always used like the same like TK Shillings type handle.
Yeah.
And then when I met you guys, I'm like, okay, well, I guess this is still online. And then it just like in the nature of friendship, like you kept interacting with like more and more of my life. And it's like, hey, why are you TK here and Kirk here? I'm like, are you lying to us? No. So, eventually we just had to, okay.
That's right. When Kirk finally accepted us, he allowed us not to call him TK, which we had been calling him, and said, we're all friends now. And so now you can call me Kirk. But it took a while for him to warm up to us.
It's like how the French have like vu and tu, it's that same,
I do not speak French.
You keep saying that.
This has been identified a number of times. Everybody always wants to speak French in front of me. I don't understand it. I'm sorry.
All people from Ohio speak French.
Is that true, Dan? Do you speak French?
No.
You said that pretty Frenchy, though.
No, I don't speak. I took 3 years of German in high school. I think I can count to 10 in German still, but that's about it.
You can do a for loop in German.
Yeah. Oh, that class was a mess.
Okay. Speaking of, no, that's a terrible segue. Not gonna do it. So normally when we have people on the podcast, we have some idea of what we're going to talk about with them. And I had lots of different ideas about what we should talk about with Kirk, but I said, what are you interested in talking about? And Kirk, you said making mistakes. And I just thought like, that's such a fantastic topic. But I just want to get a little bit of insight into, one, you answered pretty quickly, I feel like. And two, why was this a topic that appealed to you?
The topic appealed to me because honestly, when I think of my journey in tech and I guess just my professional life in general, for better or worse, I see it as like a series of like mistakes, good moments, but ultimately mistakes. And there's been all these conversations, with our members, especially like, what is a junior engineer? What is a senior engineer? What am I supposed to be? And I'm just like, I'm here. I've been writing code professionally for 5 years, if you count like from my internships, maybe like 7 years. And I don't feel particularly senior, and I don't feel particularly junior. And I don't really know how to like quantify the things that I've done, except that like I know like the lessons I've learned from like all the places that I went wrong. And I feel like every time I have gotten better at being a developer, it was like immediately following a mistake or something wrong. And at the time, I'm like, I felt terrible. I'm like, oh, I'm not good at this. This is the worst. And now I'm just like, well, it would have been worse if like everything had gone like great and perfect, and then just like working in anxiety and like mental health struggles, and like the path to where I am now feels, I don't know, if you're just looking at me now, you're like, oh, okay, he's got it. Like he's got this figured out. He knows what he's doing. Like he's in a career, he's got it all together. Like that was not the case at all, which is another reason why the whole, like my degree is completely different than what I'm doing now. And even the specific role that I'm in right now, the type of software I'm working in, wasn't something that I planned at all. It's just like how things happen to go. So I felt like it would be relevant for people to talk about, not the Twitter experience of, I launched 100 websites in 100 days and I made $100 million. Like, let me tell you how. Like, no, I didn't.
Are you calling out my Twitter account?
It depends. Have you launched 100 websites in 100 days?
All the time. That's what I do every week for fun.
Of course. And I mean, even virtual coffee, like I feel like the big appeal of virtual coffee is that like I get to interact with developers being normal, as opposed to LinkedIn and Twitter, like every other place. Like you're not really allowed to be normal, right? Like, and even when we choose to be vulnerable, like it's a very specific choice and we can do it in very specific ways. But if I go to the VC chat right now, like I can go to random and be like, I just ate a bag of Cheetos and veg salad for like 2 hours. And then someone will be like, yeah, man, I love Cheetos, and that's like a normal thing because we are normal people. I get very frustrated with the conversations around developers sometimes because I feel that we're always trying to other ourselves and it unintentionally ostracizes parts of the community. People are always very quick to identify, the developer brain is like this, the developer mind is like this. I'm like, we're not different than other people, right? Like we have a job we do and we're good at it because we do it. If I didn't do any coding, I wouldn't be good at coding. Like I don't get to, like, there's no like special part of my brain that's like, C#. It's just because I did C#, So
yeah,
I think all that Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I really like that idea of the vulnerability that we see online is still a choice of when people are vulnerable, right? So that's a point where there may have been 10 other points that they haven't shared, right?
Yep.
And when you have a close community like virtual coffee, or, whether it's in a Tuesday, Thursday coffee, or it's in Slack, this is a close group of people. And so vulnerability is definitely more natural for our group of people, which also allows us to grow, I think, in ways that if we didn't have that closeness, that intimacy, we wouldn't be able to.
Yeah. There's something about like the stakes of like interaction and how much energy it takes to have interactions with people. And maybe it's different for other people, but I found like most social media interactions to be very high stakes in terms of, this thing I put out better be a good thing. And even if no one else cares, like I'm sort of judging it as but I don't, that's fine, but you can't sort of do that all the time. And it's good to have spaces where you can just, be okay and trust other people to just like let you be okay or not okay.
Yeah, totally. One of the Colleen on last episode was talking about a similar idea of, she was part of other communities and Twitter and stuff, and she found the same thing where it's harder to share any sort of struggles or anything like that in certain situations. But I feel like in virtual coffee, because partly, at least this is my thing, but like, because people know me or I know other people, I have to worry less about being misinterpreted or, I don't know, judged or things like that. And with Twitter, it's like it's going out into the world. Who knows is ever going to see it. And, so then I sweat over every single word, in a tweet. And therefore, well, for me, I tweet like once every 3 months or something like that. But
I think, like, kind of playing off that too, the community has made me feel like I can be more vulnerable in other spaces, because there's this group of people that I have that I know support me. And so that's allowed me to be freer in what I say on Twitter or whatever. So, like, I cried at WandaVision last week. And the week before that, like, I don't know, just stuff about frustrations and growing pains and that kind of thing. When you know that there's a group of people behind you, it's just easier to do in life in general, I think.
Yeah. I remember one of the big things for me, I think, was, well, at the time, I think we called it the ADD, ADHD channel. And then it became like the neurodiverse channel. Mental health, I think, is one of those things that's just still in a space that's very difficult to talk about in general, but also in like professional settings. No one wants to admit it or be honest about it. But like, I can't think about my coding journey without thinking about, there was a time for about, 9 months where I just, I really could not do anything. I was just kind of like completely immobilized by anxiety and all this other stuff. And I had no idea if I would ever work again. And in that time, and this was a little bit before VC, but one of the things that did help me like was online communities. Like I couldn't really go anywhere. So like finding nice spaces online, like kind spaces online, was like my way of like solace and recovery. And I remember there'd be days when I'd be like, okay, you can't do anything else today, but you can like be nice to somebody. And VC has like a lot of that energy, where it's like, okay, like my day's been going really crappy, like work has not been working out or family trouble or whatever it is. Like I can go on like virtual coffee and like be nice to someone, or like support them. Or I feel like the community is just like doing that constantly. Like we're all just helping each other because like it makes us feel good. Like it feels good to make other people feel good.
Yeah.
And that's like forever energy, right? Like you can do that forever. And, we can talk about how like, it's almost a little, you almost have to be a little careful. Otherwise you will keep doing that and not do like anything else because like, it's very validating. But I do think it's like a very good thing. So a lot of times you'll hear people talk about even the online space now in the pandemic. A lot of people have had to move to these spaces and like, oh, it's not the same. I miss real life. Like, this is all fake. And I'm like, it is different. And obviously I do wish like things were how they used to be and we could travel again and we could have those like real contacts. But I think it's fair to say like the online space is, it's not a not real space. It's just a different space, right? Like it's lost like physical connections, but like all the other connections are still there. And I've met some of my most important, most trusted, most valued, most loved people online. So, it's all real, which is why you shouldn't be mean on Twitter.
I want to jump back a second to the idea of mistakes, because I think that like there's a couple of different things. I think sometimes when people mistake mistakes for failure, but also I think that there's an idea that imperfect things are mistakes, right? And I don't really think that's true, but I think it took me a little bit to get there. And so I just want to talk a little bit about your approach to doing something that's imperfect or putting something imperfect out into the world.
How dare you put me on the spot like this? Do you think this is a podcast? No. I have a complicated relationship with stuff like mistakes because even though for a long time I didn't admit it, I do have the type of personality who wants to do something like right the first time, which means I will spend either way too much time planning or way too much time like micro tweaking. And, if I definitely like have my flaw, I think it's definitely just finish a thing and then you can come back later is not my natural like instinct. And it was really funny. I'm going to say something very nerdy now, as if the last 100 sentences haven't been very nerdy. But there is this role-playing game called Neverwinter Nights. It's like a Dungeons and Dragons game. And I love this game. I've spent hours playing this game. I've never beat this game, not once. What I will do is I will spend like days thinking of the character I'm going to make. I'm like, they're going to do this, and then they're going to do this at this level, and I would do all that, and then like I would not actually do it. And I didn't know why for a long time, and through just like introspection and talking with like therapists and stuff like that, it's like, okay, I definitely am terrified of failure, especially like catastrophic failure. And I think like, okay, I'm going to do this. Everyone I know is going to hate me. Like it's all just kind of going to go wrong. Mm-hmm. And then you just don't want to do anything, right? Because like if I don't do anything, then I can't mess up anything. But that's like it's a really difficult way to live life. Like it's very safe, but it's not very fulfilling, and it ends up being very frustrating. So I think when I think of mistakes I've made, I don't think of those moments where I've done something wrong. I think of those moments where like I failed to do something even though I could be wrong, or even though it could go wrong. And kind of like that paralysis is a thing that's my personal thing, the thing that sort of holds me back a lot. So like I want to tell people like, like when I say, I've been doing development for 7 years, a lot of that has been not doing development or being scared to do development or being scared to take certain positions because I was worried that I wouldn't be able to handle it, or I started something and then like the pressure of not doing like a perfect job caused it to go wrong in the first place. And that's like a real thing I think happens to a lot of people. So, just to say, it definitely also happens to me.
I love that. It's like, and it's an interesting thing that, I don't know that it's obvious when you're in the middle of it. If you haven't framed it that way to yourself, that sort of you know, I'm sure people, I mean, I know that I have, at least I'm just going to talk from personal experience, you know, have run into that, you know, avoiding jumping into something or committing to something because of fear, you know, because of fear of failure or for me, it's the things that come along with failure, right? So for me, it's not so much being afraid to, you know, afraid that I won't. I'm just trying to think of a good example. I can't think of one, but like, not that I won't be able to complete the task, right? But that not completing the task or completing it in some way that is not, you know, amazing and perfect will cause me, you know, embarrassment or let people down, other things like that, right? And the complicated emotions that can come with that. And I just love that you, Kirk, I mean, I've like learned from you, like just talking about this sort of thing out loud, you know, I don't know, it's both like sharing makes other people feel more comfortable with sharing, you know, but also the way to frame stuff like this, sometimes people don't connect the dots in their own lives, you know, until they maybe hear what other people are going through, and you know, something rings a bell, right? Which has happened a lot to me in virtual coffee, just you know, talking with people, especially, you know, Kirk and Bekah, just kind of over and over again, you know. So I don't really have a point other than, you know, thank you, Kirk, for like sharing all that stuff.
I always like to say Kirk is the heart of virtual coffee, right? Like he allows us this safe space to be vulnerable when you need somebody to talk to, even if you think, I don't want anybody to hear what I'm feeling or these words to come out of my mouth. Like I always know that, okay, I can talk to Kirk about this. And there's something about that, you know, I don't know, you just have this give off this vibe where you allow people to come to you in that way. But also because of the way that you share, that definitely creates a space where I'm like, okay, well, he shared about that, now I can. And I think that, you know, that's so important to what we're talking about too. Like I know for me, I also have these fears that have prevented me from doing things. And, you know, one of them was I was just not going to apply for developer jobs after I graduated from Flatiron School. I was like, I can't do this. So I will just not do anything. And my husband's a developer too. And he was like, nope, nobody ever feels ready. So you just have to do it. I'm like, okay. Well, then I'll put out this tweet or whatever. But, you know, what I'm like finding now, I was terrified of that and all of the times that I've had to apply for jobs. But now those fears, I can kind of like are tied to this feeling of maybe I won't be dependable, right? I get really stuck on this idea of like, you have to be perfect to be dependable. But just to be able to hear people talk through their own experiences and say like, oh, I didn't know what I was doing at this point. And to talk to new devs now and say like, okay, like I felt this exact fear, or I understand where you're coming from. And here are some things that you could think of. But sometimes the most important thing is just like surrounding yourself with, you know, good people, a community of people like you guys.
Yeah. I had like a bunch of thoughts in my head and they'll just like condense on like a very enthusiastic yes. Yeah, I think it's very, very valuable to have spaces where you can share without fearing being judged, right? And I mean, like VCs, well, like it doesn't have, it could be anywhere. And when I think about like the value of therapy, or therapy is this, you know, this person who, you know, you say whatever to them and then like, okay, cool, I'll see you next week. Right. And you don't have to kind of hold that. Or even, you know, before it was like a village elder or your priest or whoever, but there's always that same thing. Like you can talk and someone will listen, but like, they're not going to change the way they behave towards you at the end, which I think is just something that's important for people in general. And when I had like my moments of like very intense trauma and anxiety and PTSD, like the thing I remember the most was like thankfully I had family who just said, okay, like they didn't make me feel bad for feeling bad, and I didn't know if I was going to be okay. They didn't know if I was going to be okay, but they were like, like we love you regardless. So it's, if you can, I like the idea of letting people know that, okay, whatever you say to me right now, like I'm not, like it's not going to change. Like I'm not going to change things like because of it. Like I just want to listen. And that doesn't mean like we're in problem solving mode. Like for now, we're just in listening mode because that was what was done for me. And that was really important for me. And I don't think I would be here if someone hadn't done that for me. So if I can do that for other people, that would be nice. Not to say, I want to be very clear that I'm like perfect at these things. I am very much not. And there's a certain group of people who also know me for being like very reserved and maybe aloof. And this pandemic has definitely not been good for like my type of personality who already wanted to be inside a lot. And like I'm really, really inside. So I'm also thankful that there are friends who will like reach out and be like, hey, we should do something because we should do something. But yeah, it's just, I don't know. I feel like I don't really have any insights about software except functional programming. Like we can talk about that all the time because I love that. But I feel like the only difference between me as a junior developer and me as a senior developer is that I have become a lot more empathetic, and I have realized like how fragile sort of these things are, these like titles and these positions and all these things we hype ourselves up about. And what's really important are, our relationships. And trying to be good at those feels like as worthwhile an endeavor as, trying to be good at, I don't know, what's the latest JavaScript thing people are into? Something.js.
Yeah. And I want to say too, I think that those moments where we allow ourselves to talk through things or we're vulnerable with other people, that allows us to grow in ways that we can't otherwise, right? Like I am very much, I don't know what the word is right now. I process things out loud rather than thinking them through in my head, right? And so I will go on tangents that might not make sense to many of the people who are next to me, but it's just because I'm thinking through these things. And a lot of times just having someone there that can kind of figure out what's going on and direct my thoughts that are going all over the place is enough to get me to where I need to go to move forward and to grow a little bit more. And so for a lot of years, I never did that. I was just very, very much internal. And just over the last couple of years, I've started to become aware of how important it is to make connections and how that allows us to grow in different ways. And I think that, no matter what you do, the best version of yourself includes connecting with other people in real and meaningful ways, and that will inform everything else that you do in life.
Yeah, I think it reminds me of a conversation we had. I can't remember when we had this conversation. Bekah and you and I were talking about how, like the role of trauma in our lives. Like, okay, this was a thing that happened that was like a bad thing to happen, but sort of the person that emerged from it is probably a kinder person maybe than we might have otherwise have been. And I think that's kind of something I worry about or try and pay attention to sometimes. So, and I think the industry is like moving in a better direction, but sometimes I think about like when they ask you, hey, well, there's this like 8-month period where you didn't work, like what happened then? And I'm not sure what answer you're supposed to give, but I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to say, well, like my depression got really bad and I just didn't do anything for 8 months, right? Like no one, with all the lip service companies pay to like Like no one actually really wants to hear that. It's the Twitter thing all over again. But that is, I don't know. It's just, that's real people, right? Like we do not have this like happy-go-lucky path of work to work to work to cool thing to cool thing to cool thing. Or, you know, maybe we shouldn't ask people like why there's a big dip in their like GitHub points thing. Like maybe, you know, maybe that doesn't matter, right? Like maybe you should be judging me on like what I've done, not like the spaces between the things that you think are relevant. You know, I don't know. And I mean, the big thing for me was always, I've always worked with small companies. I worked with a research department at a school. And now I work for like a very, very small software development company. So, you know, there's a long time where I did not do any programming when I left work. Like I came to work, I did my job. When I came home, I did not do anything. I just didn't have any motivation for it. Like it just didn't make me happy. And then Virtual Coffee happened and Hacktoberfest happened. And all of a sudden, like, oh, okay, I'm not just doing this by myself. Like I'm doing this with other people. And I get to show other people things I've learned, and they're showing me things that they've learned, and everybody's super appreciative. And honestly, that was the first time like I'd done any side projects in months.
Can we just pause for a second and talk about Hacktoberfest? Because I think like that was a really pivotal moment for me, especially in learning from other people and growing. And actually in the trailer for the podcast, there's a quote from you about community in Hacktoberfest. And so you did a ton of work to make sure that the community was supported through documentation and through your presence and things like that. So you really played a major role in that. Can you just like talk a little bit about your process and going through that? Because you played a lot of different roles.
I can get on my soapbox for this because this is super important. So like, I think the big thing we learned from Hacktoberfest was we were all asking this question of, well, why aren't more newer developers getting involved in open source? You know, there seemed to be all this hype about open source, but when you spoke to people, they're like, actually, it still feels very intimidating. I still don't know what to do. Like, I don't think I can do this. And I mean, there's a big discussion there, but to me, the short answer was, oh, well, we say that this is open and inviting for new people, but it's actually not. And it's like, well, why? And it's like, well, because like not enough has been done to make it welcoming, right? Like, and I'm not saying that to chastise the people who haven't done all the work. It's just to say that like it is actually a lot of work. It is like you have to be intentional about these things if you actually want people to work with you, especially newer people. And we realized, oh, it's actually very difficult if you don't know what to do to like clone a repo or get a project started or do a PR. And you are super terrified that you're going to mess up someone else's work. And you are completely unsure that what you're doing is a meaningful contribution. So you have to come at it from so many different angles. And then, you know, I started writing all that documentation because like I kept finding like more and more like, okay, this actually isn't very well explained, or like this isn't well explained, or there's docs for this piece, but not that piece. But there's like a full cycle of what it takes to like make a meaningful contribution. And remember, we had like this big discussion of, okay, well, do we find projects online and we direct them to people, and we ultimately decided like it has to be people from the community, mainly because like it's the only way like we can be sure that the maintainers have healthy interactions with the people who want to help, which is like the most critical thing. And then that became, but wait, what about the maintainers? Like they also need to be supported too. And that became, so, you know, and I love that project. It was a lot of work, but like the big takeaway for me was like, okay, these things are possible, but it is a lot of work. And I think like the danger is always that people want to do a good job, but they are unaware of the amount of work it's going to take. And then like they get burnt out, and then the people they're trying to help get frustrated. And it reminds me of one time I attended this training. It was some group, and they're like, "Oh, we want to give back. We want to help out in the community. We want to like bring tech to um, communities and cultures who don't typically have access to it." And they made this whole program, and they got a bunch of people. And then on the day of it, I remember the presenter was using a Mac, and he had all his stuff set up. And he's like, "I'm ready to go." And then one lady was like, "I don't have a Mac. Like, how do I install this on Windows?" And he's like, "Oh, I don't really know. I didn't really think about that." And I'm like, "What do you mean you didn't think about that?" Like, I mean, I get it, but like 90% of the earth uses Windows. And I don't know about anybody else, but like when I abandon a project, it's not like I'm midway through the project and I'm like, "Oh, this isn't for me." It's like, I couldn't install this, you know, I couldn't get this file to work. There's an error and I don't know what to do. That's why people stop things, right? It's always the config. So it's like, okay, well, if you're going to teach anyone anything, you need to dedicate time to helping them get the project set up. And you have to anticipate at least like the major ways that people will come. Like you have to meet people where they are. Like no one's going to get a Mac. And he's like, "Oh, well, you can get this to replicate." Like, no, sir. No one's, I don't know.
And I think just to kind of tie some of these ideas together, like you said, it takes a lot of time, right? And sometimes you're just not aware of the needs or the problems that are going to show up. And, that's part of the learning process and that's part of the growing process. And thinking through things deliberately is super important and is also very, very challenging. Like, Dan, I know that you set up the issue for all of our contributors for the virtual coffee PR for Hacktoberfest, and thinking through all of these things is pretty challenging, right?
Yeah. And I mean, Kirk, like what you said about, people had started an open source project, but didn't think through all of the writing, all of the documentation you have to do. And it is hard. I don't think you're going to find anybody that will argue with that. It's a hard thing with anything. I mean, and it's a completely different mindset than coding. And that's, I mean, it's just like another reason why we wanted to, we decided to work with just a few of our, maintainers that we knew, because we were going to require them to put a bunch of work in ahead of time to get their, repositories ready. And yeah, so I mean, I made that. One of the repositories was our virtual coffee site, and I had an idea to kick our event off with, just a very simple, like a pull request thing to, without a lot of coding, but that everybody could do, sort of together in an event. And it seemed easy in my head, and there's just so many things you have to get down on paper to make sure that everybody is sort of covered. Like you said, Kirk, it's like the Windows thing. I mean, like, different operating systems, it's, you just have to do tests almost like, I mean, maybe not automated tests, but like browser tests or something, like in front end. Right. So I put out some code, and then after I work on it for a while, I have to go and check it, that it works in Safari and works in Firefox and Chrome, but when you're writing documentation, that sort of thing is harder to just like check. Right. And so you front load a bunch of work and then hope that it's good enough, and then hope that your, contributors let you know when it's not good enough, either just by asking questions or submitting pull requests, with documentation fixes, things like that. Which, I mean, Kirk, I don't know how many hours you spent in the September, preparing for Hacktoberfest, just writing open source docs, both for us to use as like templates and specific projects. And also you were a maintainer for your own project that was, heavily involved with Hacktoberfest. But like how much time do you think you spent in September writing docs for Hacktoberfest?
Way too much.
Way too much.
But that's the thing, right? It was definitely a lot of work, but at the time it didn't feel like, I didn't feel bad doing the work, right? Because it felt like, okay, this is meaningful and this is going to help people. And it was also helping me because it's things I want to learn about. And I mean, one of the things I do like about Virtual Coffee is what you said, like the stuff we're doing for the community, it's not strangers, So
Yeah, totally.
there's a little less pressure to like get it absolutely perfect the first time. And I have a little more trust that people will like suggest things to help. What was I going to say? There's a thought in my head. It's gone now. Right. But yeah, but like all this stuff comes down to whenever you try and do something like this, you are trying to empower people, right? You're trying to give people everything they need to do the thing that they want. But it's like, okay, you have to think of the people that you're serving, but you also have to think of yourself. Like it also has to be designed in a way that you can keep empowering them, because otherwise, and I'm not pointing fingers, I'm pointing fingers at all of us. You get into this space where you're doing this stuff, but it's also like taking a toll on you. Like it's I don't know, it's a I don't know how to describe it. Like you should also be empowering yourself. I remember another VC member, the very, very wonderful Nick Taylor. You know, we were just like pairing up working on something because Nick is amazing. And he was like, hey, do you want to like go live on this? I'm like, I mean, yeah, sure. And guess what? Like he had a setup already that made it very easy for him to like quickly get up and running, right? Which took off the pressure for me because I didn't have to do a bunch of prep, but also took off the pressure for him because he didn't have to like spend a bunch of cycles on setup. So it became easy for him to help people and like pair in that way. And I was like, okay, that's neat. That's a good thing to do. And, you know, with Virtual Coffee, like we've been trying to get into that direction where it's like, it's easy when someone wants to do something that we can like help them in a way that's also sustainable for us. But again, like that means you do have to front load a lot of prep to get to that space,
Yeah.
you know, and there's a bunch of things like we want to do. And the people are like, oh, like, yeah, we want to do everything, but whatever we do in order to not be like other experiences that have been frustrating or disappointing, we take the time to think like, okay, either we can set this up in a way that like people are empowered and we're empowered, or we might have to hold off on this until we can, you know?
Yeah. And I think that idea of things that look easy usually have a ton of time put in that you don't know. So if there's a developer and you're watching them code and it looks so easy, right? It's because they've done it before. Or, you know, I was trying to explain to my 6-year-old who was watching a painting tutorial and he just couldn't get it. Like the girl was painting the turkey in the video, right? Like, you know, this is not the first time she's painted a turkey, right? She's probably practiced this a bunch of times before and then recorded this video and maybe edited this video, you know? But if something goes smoothly, that's because there's been a lot of deliberate thought and effort put in to make sure that that happens. And so, you know, everybody starts from a very imperfect place. It's just the practice and the time put in that takes you to get to that place where it looks easy, but nothing is just easy, right?
Bringing it back to our theme of mistakes, when you are working with someone and, you know, you see them like solve a problem that you've been spending forever on, it's not because they're a genius. I mean, they might be a genius, but that's not why they solve it. Like, it's because like they solved that problem before, right? Like this has already happened to them or something similar. And they're working off of that mistake or that frustration that they had back then to kind of avoid it now and like steer you away from that path, right? Like, I don't know, and that's just like that to me. Like, oh, what's a senior developer? Well, someone who's, I think someone said maybe this is from Twitter, someone who's made a lot of mistakes already. You know, and when you're new, you haven't made that many mistakes yet. But then this gets right back to providing opportunities. You need to provide opportunities for people to make mistakes. I don't think there's anyone who's been in code for more than 5 years who at some point like wasn't given the chance to do something that they were probably not qualified to do or not exactly ready to do. Like someone gave you a chance and you kind of have to pass that forward. You know, otherwise you're being I feel like a little disingenuous about how this process works.
Yeah. Yeah. And you had mentioned, and actually you were talking about the senior developer distinction, like a while, like near the beginning of our talk, but you mentioned empathy, as like one of the indicators, right? But of a senior developer. And I think that's, I think it's really important to keep in mind. One of the things that I've learned over the last, like, however long with virtual coffee specifically is, like leaning on that empathy to remember that something is easy for me because I have done it a bunch of times. And, when you practice anything, it eventually becomes second nature. And then you kind of can forget what it was like, to learn it in the first place. I think that's true with anything really, but especially true with coding because coding happens so fast and, lots of time, people learn in all different ways, across different ages and different, time spans. I learned how to code over, I don't know, 5 or 10 years, here and there, it wasn't like I wasn't trying to do it in 6 months or whatever, because I was trying to switch careers. I didn't even think I said the word career out loud until I was like 30, but just like circling back, I mean, the framing around empathy as a key indicator of, being a senior developer, I think is, very good and very important. And I appreciate you like talking about it, with us.
Yeah. And I think everyone here, at least everyone that I know in the coding space, is pretty much in agreement, right? Like, the 10x engineer is not the person, I hate that phrase, but it's not the person who can like work 10 times faster than other people. It's the person who makes 10 other people around them like better at the job, right? Like when you think of that's, and then you realize that role is a supporting role, right? It's a management role. It's a mentoring role. Find me that person. Find me the person where I can put them on a team, and all of a sudden everybody else on the team is like feeling better, right? That person is doing way more for the organization than someone who's, I don't know, sitting at his desk or their desk, just not interacting with others. Mm-hmm. And I mean, but that's not even something I talk too much about anymore because, at least again, I don't think there's anybody in the spaces that I'm in who still holds on to that idea of being a good developer means like knowing lots of things or being able to type really, really fast or whatever. And it's been really heartening to see even the people in VC who have been like job hunting and looking for interviews. Everyone has a pretty much, at a certain point in everyone's career, like you hear the same phrases being echoed. Like, I just want to work with nice people. I just want to do work that's meaningful. I want to have like a healthy balance of like my family life and my professional responsibilities. I want to give back and mentor people newer in the space, and I want to like receive support from people who are more senior in the space. Like everyone says the same thing, So it feels like the natural space to be, and it feels like the space that we're going. And if I can contribute to that, that is awesome. There was a discussion, I think yesterday or the day before, about passion on Twitter. And it was really interesting seeing everybody's responses. And some people were like, hey, I'm doing this to support my family, or I'm doing this. And some people are like, I'm doing this because I really like it. And like both of those things are valid, I'm not so concerned with your motivations for being in the space as much as your actions while you're here, and if you're not being a jerk, then, I feel like, cool. If you are being a jerk, then cool, but like we can't be friends because you're going to be a jerk to my other friends.
I like it. Taking a hard line. I like it. No jerk. Yeah. No jerk friends.
No jerk friends.
I'm gonna have to call some of my old friends, I think, and let them know I can't be friends with them anymore. But
I have to call my old self.
I mean, I say it. I'm trying very hard to sort of be clear in all this that I'm very much making lots of mistakes. And in a lot of ways, I'm a very big hypocrite about all these things. There's very much areas of code that like I really want to be good at. Part of my motivation is like, I want to be good at this thing. I would like to be knowledgeable about this thing and smart about this thing. I want to be like, I don't know. And that's just like a personal goal. As you all know, and anyone who's spoken to me for more than 5 seconds is aware of, I'm a big fan of like certain styles of programming. And I try really hard to be good at those things. Last night, just doing some work on the newsletter, and then I was just like reading like functional TypeScript stuff, because that's fun for me, and I like that. But even that, I've read like the same articles like 8 or 10 times, just trying to grok some of these things, and like it still hasn't worked yet, and that's super frustrating. It makes me very angry, and I feel like an idiot. But when I said earlier that, I don't think I really have an aptitude for programming so much as like, I just don't mind doing it. Like, I don't mind writing code. Like, I can do it, and I don't mind being frustrated about it, and I'll keep coming back to it. And if you do that for long enough, I guess, you get good at programming, but I really want to dispel the notion that people think like, okay, I need to get this, and I don't think that's how software works at all. Like you try and do it, and then you keep doing it, and then you start to get things. But if you feel like, oh, this is just not intuitive for me, I don't think it's intuitive for anyone. And for the people it is intuitive for, I don't care if they're not like a nice person. I'm still not going to want to work with them. Give me somebody who finds this stuff is really hard, but like they're earnest and they want to learn and they're a good teammate over, I don't know, someone who like, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that is a great way to sum up everything that you've been talking about, right? It's about growing through our mistakes and about being kind to the people around us. And that supportive environment is what allows everybody to grow, right? So it's community growth. I want to thank you for being here with us today, Kirk. This was such a fantastic interview. We heard so many good thoughts about programming and learning and growing, and I'm very, very excited to share this. Where can our listeners find you?
You can find me at Virtual Coffee. You should come hang out with us at Virtual Coffee. I'm also on Twitter at Kirk Codes, where sometimes I say smart things and most of the time I just make memes. Where else? I guess those are sort of the main spaces. I think VC and Twitter. I guess my GitHub, PK Shill. For anyone listening, if you ever want to talk about functional programming or dive into languages like Elm, or you just want to hear some strange man from the Caribbean talk too much about types, we can totally get into that. But yeah, thank you for having me. I will say, in a very, very fundamental way, becoming best friends with Bekah and Dan has been one of the best parts of the last year for me.
Buying BFF necklaces.
Oh yeah, we can get the full necklace bracelet. We can do the whole thing. Yeah, so and I think that's ultimately it, right? Like, it's so much easier to work with people that you appreciate and appreciate you back. And if we could do more of that, then I think we have a good chance of doing some cool stuff.
Great. All right. Well, we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye, Kirk.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Virtual Coffee Podcast. This episode was produced by Dan Ott and Bekah Harat-Weigel and edited by Dan Ott. If you have questions or comments, you can hit us up on Twitter at virtualcoffeeio, or you can email us at podcast@virtualcoffee.io. You can find the show notes, plus you can sign up for our newsletter to find out what Virtual Coffee's been up to on our website at virtualcoffee.io.
Please subscribe to our podcast and be sure to leave us a review. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.